And thank you so much for joining us for The Issue Is. Our guest tonight is one of the most powerful and influential members of Congress. Congressman Adam Schiff represents Burbank and is chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, welcome back to The Issue Is.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Alex.
You were one of our first guests on our first show, which we will always be grateful for. So much has happened since. One of the big stories of this week, the president signing this deal to avoid a government shutdown, but also declaring a national emergency. Do you think he has the right to declare a national emergency when it comes to the border and border wall funding?
No, a declaration of emergency is a patently unconstitutional act. You couldn't have a weaker case for such a declaration. This is a matter that the Congress has considered. It has reached a bipartisan agreement on. That bipartisan agreement did not include the billions the president wanted to build a wall. And to consider that an emergency, well, if every time a president didn't get what he wanted from Congress, it was an emergency, we would be in a constant state of emergency. It does show, though, what contempt the president has for our system of checks and balances, for the rule of law and our institutions. And the question will be, do the GOP members share that contempt? Mitch McConnell was reported to have urged the president not to do this, talked about what a mistake it would be, and concerns Republicans had over it. He has now evidently done a complete 180. And tragically, I think this is what we have seen the last 2 years, and that is when the president has taken action really jeopardizing the foundations of our rule of law, the GOP has stood silent or acquiescent in the face of it.
In addition to being a member of Congress, you're also an attorney. This is going to be challenged in the courts, could end up in the Supreme Court. How do you think the courts are going to rule on this?
I think they'll almost certainly rule against him, unless they decide they're going to completely defer to the president, and I don't think there's any sound basis for doing so. They'll have to look at the facts, and the facts are that the problem along the southern border has actually improved over the last years and decades, that the president was aware of this situation for his first 2 years in office and did nothing about it, that the Congress has considered and rejected what the president was advocating for, that when the intelligence chiefs testified and talked about where threats to the country came from, it didn't even identify the southern border. So all of those facts so strongly militate against the idea that this is some kind of emergency, the president loses. But I don't think the president is necessarily looking for a win in court. I think what he's looking for is cover to withstand the criticism he's getting from Rush Limbaugh or Ann Coulter or any of the other sort of right-wing pundits. But that is also not a basis to declare an emergency.
And now he gets the government open as well and doesn't have to deal with the fallout of another shutdown. Let's talk for a moment about your investigation. You're leading the House Intelligence Committee investigation of the president and any potential connections with Russia. There was some reporting this week that the Senate investigation has not found evidence of direct collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Have you?
We've certainly seen evidence of collusion, and some of that is direct and some of it is circumstantial. And it appears on the Senate side there's a difference of opinion between the chair and the ranking member. That is not, all that unexpected. But the reality is the evidence is in plain sight. When the Russians approached the campaign through the president's son, offering dirt on Hillary Clinton as a part of what it described as the Russian government effort to help the Trump campaign, and the Trump campaign's reaction was, we would love that help. That's evidence of collusion. When the president is trying to make the most lucrative business deal of his life, building a Trump Tower in Moscow, seeking Kremlin help for it, reportedly offering inducements to Putin to get it, while misleading the country and advocating for a changed relationship with Russia that might include relaxation of sanctions on Russia, that's a form of collusion. When the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, is meeting secretly or talking secretly with the Russian ambassador to undermine U.S. sanctions on Russia and lying about it, that's another form of collusion. So I could go on and on. To say that you don't see evidence of it means you're not willing to look at what is in plain sight.
And one of those things that you're looking into is the idea of money laundering. You've said that that was the first thing that you were going to start on as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Have you found evidence of money laundering between the Trump organization and Russians?
We wanted to look into this issue because there have been persistent and credible allegations that the president's business was laundering Russian money, but the Republicans were unwilling to allow us to do so. So for the first year and a half of the investigation, the Republicans shut down any effort to look into that question. So we are just beginning to look at that now. But here's the problem. If the Russians were engaged in illicit financial transactions with the Trump organization, that is a deep form of compromise, which the Russians could expose at any time. And although the president has tried to draw a red line and said, you can't look at my business, we see the perils of allowing the subject of an investigation to dictate the terms of that investigation in what we already know about his efforts to build this Trump Tower. The special counsel has said the president's business stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars from that transaction at a time when the Russians, if they got sanctions relieved, stood to make billions of dollars. That is a deeply compromising situation. So it needs to be exposed if it exists. If it doesn't exist, that is money laundering, then we need to say that as well. But to leave it as a question, to leave essentially national security decisions without exposure if they're being compromised would be to neglect our national security.
So have you actually seen those records yet, or you haven't done that yet?
We're just starting to pursue them now. Our committee was only organized about a week ago because the Republicans dragged their heels on appointing the one new member that they had. I don't know why that took a month for them to identify, but by not naming their members, they were able to slow down at least our initial work, but that work is now going on apace.
Another bombshell story of the week is Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, which you helped do the oversight for, giving an interview to 60 Minutes, where he talks about why he started the Trump-Russia investigation and concerned that he was going to be fired and the investigation would be buried. Take a listen.
I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground, and if somebody came in behind me and closed it and tried to walk away from it, they would not be able to do that without creating a record of why they'd made that decision.
He also talked about the fact that there were cabinet officials that talked about the 25th Amendment and potentially saying that President Trump was unfit for office. What do you make of that interview?
Well, look, the concerns that the president might try to shut down the Russia investigation have been well borne out. Those were not illusory fears that Mr. McCabe expressed. The president has tried to shut down the investigation. He has attacked it continually. He's tried to impeach the credibility of Bob Mueller, as well as his whole team. He has, taken issue with his last attorney general, ended up firing essentially his last attorney general because his attorney general wouldn't recuse himself. He wanted the attorney general, Jeff Sessions, to essentially bring about a conclusion of that or look out for his interest in the investigation. So McCabe's fears have been realized. They're realized almost every day of this administration. In terms of discussions that took place about whether the 25th Amendment was implicated, that should not really surprise us. Those conversations were going on all over the country, and that people at the Justice Department looking at the president firing the FBI director, looking at the president reportedly bragging to the Russians in a private meeting in the Oval Office about doing so, to have conversations about whether this person is competent to lead the country. Those conversations were going on everywhere. It doesn't surprise me that they would be going on as well within the Justice Department, and whether they were in dead earnest or whether there was a certain kind of dark humor about it, I don't know, but it shouldn't be all that surprising.
This week, Paul Manafort, a judge determined that Paul Manafort lied to Robert Mueller and the special counsel. What does that mean for your investigation, the fact that Paul Manafort was lying intentionally?
Well, it underscores the need for us to find out the truth about the campaign chairman, Paul Manafort's interactions with someone associated with Russian intelligence, and that is Konstantin Kilimnik. And what I found most telling about those proceedings in which the judge found that Manafort was lying was the argument the special counsel made, which the judge, I think, probably accepted in finding the lies, that the reason why Manafort didn't tell the truth, even though he was supposed to be cooperating, was that the truth would be so damaging to Donald Trump that it would negate any chance that Manafort would get a pardon. If that's correct, then obviously we need to know about it, because Kilimnik would know about it, presumably the Russians would know about it, and again, that's a form of compromise. There have been public reports, as you know, about the campaign through Manafort sharing internal polling data with the Russians. And again, for my GOP colleagues to say there's no evidence of collusion, you have to look at these facts and really try to come up with some hard to imagine justification to say that in these facts you can see no evidence of potential collusion. What purpose would the campaign chairman for a Republican nominee for president have for sharing internal polling data with a foreign adversary?
Let's talk for a moment about the issue of guns. This week, the one-year anniversary of the Parkland school shooting, the worst campus massacre in American history. Democrats passing legislation to deal with the issue of background checks, which is widely supported by the American people. Any chance at all that Republicans in the Senate and the president will actually pass this and then sign it?
Yes, but it's not going to happen unless we keep up the pressure. We've seen year after year, tragedy after tragedy, how the NRA and those that are beholden to it in Congress continue to capitulate to the NRA to see what a difficult fight this is. But things have changed since Parkland. They have changed largely in the state legislatures around the country that have passed new laws since then. But we're seeing new momentum in the Congress. And one of the things that tells me we are reaching a tipping point is that so many people ran for the House of Representatives in the midterms, not by running away from the gun issue, but by running towards it and saying, I am going to embrace common sense reforms like universal background checks, even in parts of the country where candidates often try to avoid that issue. That tells you something is changing. So we're going to take up this bill. We're going to pass this bill. We're going to put pressure on the Senate to pass this bill. And those GOP members that are going to oppose it are going to have to answer for it with their constituents about why the lives of these young people don't matter as much as the words of the NRA.
Well, we've talked a lot about serious issues. We also like to have some fun on this show. We want to play a game with you called the Name Game, because I know you love a little Beyonce, right? I mean, Destiny's Child is your jam, right? So this is
without a question.
Yeah, this is the Name Game, which means we're going to say some names of some famous figures, and the first word that pops into your mind, or short phrase that pops into your mind when you hear it. Okay? All right.
Okay.
President Donald Trump.
He doesn't appear to like me very much.
Vice President Mike Pence.
How would you like a job where every day you have to look adoringly at Donald Trump? I feel great sympathy.
Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Fantastic leader, and what a remarkable job she has done in these negotiations over the president's wasteful wall.
The president's former personal attorney, Michaelson.
Cooperating with us, and I'm grateful that he is trying to make amends.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Dynamic, impressive, and I think the GOP underestimates her at their peril.
Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Difficult start, obviously worrying comments. She has apologized. I appreciate the apologies that she's made.
And finally, your counterpart on the Intelligence Committee, Republican Congressman Devin Nunes.
That's the easiest one, no comment.
Well, I do want to get your comment, though, on this. We like to play music on this show, so we're playing a little Billy Joel. This was your song choice, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. Why is that? I guess we lost the satellite window. Well, that was fun. That's what happens sometimes. I'll tell you, the congressman loves it. Coming up, we're going